Welcome to Sold with Webinars, a podcast that aims to uncover how the most successful experts, coaches, consultants, and e-course professionals sell their products and services with just one sales presentation or webinar. A simple sales webinar can transform the business and life of a solopreneur. And this podcast will show you how other experts just like you are generating 6 and 7 figures per year online with their webinars. So let's get started. Hey, it's Joel Urway here, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Sold with Webinars. Today, you are in for a very special treat. I just got off our interview with the legendary Jon Tarr, who has done some incredible things with webinars. And what I really liked about this interview was it helped eliminate the notion that most people believe they have to spend so much time working on their webinar. Our interview today with Jon just showed us that your webinar does not need to be perfect. In fact, Jon built a $5.5 million webinar and he launched it 15 minutes before he was scheduled to go live. Now, he shares all of his details for how he crafts his salesmanship with his webinars, and there's a lot to learn in this episode because webinars, if we allow it, can completely cripple us. They can be a huge burden. And so I'm excited to share this episode with you because I want you to understand it is completely not the case. So let's get into today's episode. Jon, dude, I'm excited.
Hey.
We just spent the weekend together over in Vegas a couple of days ago, and I'm pumped to have this conversation. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, man, for having me. I'm super excited about chatting with you, and glad we got to know each other real well this weekend. So yeah, it'll be fun. Ask me anything. I'm an open book. So.
Well, we're gonna have a blast. I am the perpetual student on this, and I'm just leading the questions. I've got a lot to learn on this because I have never done a $7,000 direct to sale webinar, and I have never written a webinar 15 minutes before it went live. So I'm going to have a lot of fun. I know my audience is going to have a lot of fun. So let's get started first. And
Cool.
Jon, just give us a quick 2-minute background about who you are, the man, the myth, legend, and
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So the short version is I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for a really long time. I've also been in corporate America too. So I've had some pretty unique experiences when I always like to tell people that ask about me, I'm super weird, and I'm weird because my parents were weird. My dad was a car dealer. He was an entrepreneur, and my mom was an accountant. So I grew up with this guy who could sell anything to anybody. And then I grew up with a mom who was like, hey, this doesn't reconcile to $5. Where's my $5? So I had this, you talk about rich dad, poor dad. I had, entrepreneur dad and accountant mom. And so it served me really well because I'm a numbers guy, but on top of that, I can sell. And so, I've just been using those abilities in direct response marketing for quite some time on the entrepreneurial side.
very cool, man. So tell me, when was the first time you got into online marketing, digital marketing, and yep.
So I, shout out to Frank Kern, bought Mass Control. I was in real estate, made a lot of money in real estate, and then lost it all when the market crashed. And that was sort of a bummer. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I'd always been a direct response marketing guy. So any business that I'd been in, whether it was auto business, which I was in for a long time, or real estate, I used direct response marketing. And so I'd heard about internet marketing, and I wanted to get in because I thought, in real estate, you got to have all your chips on the table all the time. And I'm like, I don't really feel comfortable with that anymore. So I bought Mass Control and I started watching it. And I'm like, what the hell is a sales letter versus an opt-in page? And I didn't have any idea about anything. But that's how I started in the direct response space. And I started working in direct response. And to make a long story short, I ended up going to work for Idea Incubator, Ryan Dice and Perry Belcher. And that's when some light bulbs went off for me. And my idea was I could go work for these guys. I'm an entrepreneur and I'd always made a lot of money, but I wanted to go work for these guys so that I could learn what they did and then also get on the inside of the industry. And I thought, man, that will really help me. And that's exactly what happened. So light bulbs started going off when I worked for those guys. And I saw a lot of things that they did and learned a lot there.
So real estate investor, real estate entrepreneur turned into, direct response background, dialing that in, applying it to online marketing strategies, and ultimately using that to build your audience. I know from talking with you this past weekend that it's one of your, aside from being an awesome conversion guy, you've got the blend of building massive audiences and converting them. And when you get those two put together, you have a license to print, just for lack of a better word, a shit ton of money. I mean,
Yeah.
usually people specialize in one or the other. And when you can meld both of them, I mean, that's when you light the world on fire.
Yeah, I've been pretty fortunate to be able to build big audiences. And, I always tell people, without an audience, nothing is possible. With an audience, everything works, right? You have a big audience, you're like, oh, I'm going to throw this offer out there. And guess what? Somebody's going to buy it. So that's the real key, I think, is to be able to build a big audience.
Awesome. We got two main things that we want to talk about today. So let's figure out, when did you discover webinars? When was, this whole idea of like, oh, wow, I can sell one to many? Like, tell me about how you jumped into the world of webinars.
Yeah. So with the internet marketing thing, if you want to call it that, that's the thing I really dug about it, is because I'm a salesperson and I was always used to selling one-to-one. And so then when I was at ID Incubator, I saw some different people that were doing webinars. And of course, I'm an info. I think anybody that sells info products is probably an info product junkie. And that was me. Like, I bought everything. So if you sold it, I bought it. I probably have yours. I mean, man, I bought it all. And still do. Like, I still buy everything because I really enjoy to go through it and see the marketing side. So I had seen webinars before, but I actually had, I was rolling out a new program. It was a high ticket program, and I was doing really well on the CPA side. And I wanted to create an offer, and a webinar just fit for me really well, because at that time, now it's different because I can write copy, but at that time I couldn't write copy. All I could do was talk to somebody. And so a webinar really fit with what I wanted to do there. So I'm like, okay, I'll do a webinar to your list. And that's how it sort of started. I had one guy who said, yeah, I'll promote your offer. And that's how I got started.
So when was that? Was that with, which product was that?
That was with Facebook Traffic Jam. That was in 2013.
Yep.
2013.
So in 2013, this is when you first figured out that, okay, cool, we're going to try this webinar thing. You've got an affiliate who said, I'm going to drive traffic to it. Like, yes, I think this offer is going to work to my audience. I want to echo one of the things that you talked about this past weekend. You talked about your 3-phase launch strategy. Not that we're going to get too far off topic, but I think it's really important for people to understand. And I want to make sure that I get this right. I think it was phase 1 was create the offer. So correct me if I'm wrong. It was phase 1 was create the offer. Phase 2 was then promote and scale it to affiliates and JVs. And then phase 3 was cold traffic. Was that?
Yep.
Did I get that right?
That's how I do it all the time. Yeah.
All the time. Yep. So JVs and affiliates, what you're using that for is to help get cash flow in the door. It's expensive, but it's not risk expensive. So, I mean, it's going to cost you a lot to pay for that after you make the sale. But
yeah. Well, it does two things. So if you have a back end, it's good traffic, but it does two things. So when you roll out something to your own audience, I call it ground zero. When I ran media, I would call it ground zero. If you can't convert there, it's not going to convert, right? So if your offer doesn't work to your own audience, it's not going to work. And then the next thing you want to do is so let's say I'm going to go to JV traffic. And now if Joel tells everybody how great I am and my offer doesn't work there, it's probably not going to work to phase 3, which is cold traffic. So really what I'm doing is I always look at what something's going to make me. My dad used to say you get paid in 2 ways, money and education. That phase 2 is education. And now if I can convert to Joel's audience, that means I have a much better chance of converting to completely cold traffic. And so it's an educational process all the way down when I launch an offer to know that it's going to convert.
Brilliant, man. I loved it. And I had a light bulb moment go off when you were sharing that this weekend. So, okay, let's get back on track because we're in 2013 here. You've got Facebook Traffic Jam. You've got an affiliate who wants to promote it. This is what we were talking about during the pre-podcast interview. And you said you wrote this webinar. This is your first webinar that you ever did, correct?
Correct.
And you wrote this webinar 15 minutes before you went live.
Correct.
So let's do a little open loop here. What was the overall sales that this webinar that you wrote 15 minutes before, you sold 800 people into a $7,000 price point?
Correct. 7,000 or 9,000 they paid if they went on the payments.
Yeah, multi-pay.
On the monthlies. Yeah.
Yep. So $7 or $9 grand. So that's over 5.6 million in revenue generated from a webinar that you wrote 15 minutes before it launched live.
Yep. And I mean, that doesn't include all the nonlinear revenue that I made off that audience, and I'm still making off that audience. So yeah, it was significant.
Yep. So what I want to know is, I know that my audience is a lot of people that are listening to this right now are sitting there like, I know I want to do a webinar, but like they've got the mental hurdles and the writer's block of like, what on earth am I supposed to say? Well, like, what's my introduction? What's my content? What's my close? So you did it in 15 minutes.
Yep.
What was going through your mind? Like, how did you do it? Yep.
Two things that I think that people need to understand. When I was getting into sales, and I told you my dad owned car dealerships, my dad made a lot of money. And I was like, Dad, how do you do it? How do you make a lot of money? And he's like, John, it's like stealing. It's what he said. And he's like, and he meant it. My dad loved his customers. And he said, if somebody comes on a lot and they're your age, I talk to them like I would you. And I try to help them in like I would you. And if they come on a lot and they're my mother's age, I talk to them like I would my mom. If they come on a lot and they're my age, I talk to them like I would my brother and sister. And so I think the first thing is just talk to people like they're people, because that's what they are. And so that's the first thing. And then if you add that with nobody cares about you, right? They don't care about you. They don't care. You don't have to get all weirded out that somebody cares about you, because they don't. They care about what you can do for them. That's all anybody cares about. So if you go on a webinar and you treat people really nice and you show them how you can help them solve a problem, they're going to buy your stuff. And so that's how I always start with a webinar. And that's what was going through my mind is, how can I illustrate, I've got people coming on this webinar, and at the time they wanted to know how to make money from Facebook traffic. And I was really good at that. And it's like, so let me show them how they can do that. And that's what I did. And so that's what I recommend people do, is to talk to people like people, and then understand it's about them. It's not about you. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about you. So my intros are they're not about me. Nobody cares about me, right? Everybody cares about what's in it for them. So that's how I try to approach all of my presentations.
Cool. So how long was this webinar, just out of curiosity, ballpark?
It's 90 minutes, I think.
Okay.
90 minutes.
And the call to action at the end was pushing to schedule a call or hop on the phone, and then that's where you push them into the 7 or the 9K offer.
Yep. The first one, the first one, yeah, it was a strategy session. Yep, totally. And it's a good thing, because I didn't know how to set up a cart. I mean, I didn't know any of that stuff, right? So, I kind of had to do it that way at the time.
Okay, so take me into the content of your webinar, because I know there's people with lots of different theories out there. Some people say, oh, don't teach a whole lot on your webinar. Some say provide a ton of value and teach a lot, and they're just going to naturally come and want to spend money with you. What is your opinion on the content piece of the webinar for a sales webinar?
So what I do is I give content without giving content. And what I mean by that, and Travis Sago calls it insight or kitchen table logic. So in that particular webinar, and it's still online if somebody wants to see it, I don't sell from it anymore, but I still get messages like, hey, can I buy this? And what I did was I understood the problem in the marketplace. So what was going on in everybody's head was paid traffic is expensive and it's risky, right? That's what everybody thinks. And so what I did is I created a story, and basically it was like, paid traffic is not risky if you understand how to do it. And in fact, it's free, right? And so who wants free traffic? And in fact, it's not even free. You're actually going to make like $1 a click. So then how many clicks do you want? And so I basically illustrated that story. And so I wasn't really telling them what to do, but I was explaining in this story what was possible. And so I opened their mind to, hey, this is what I do. And then if you join me, I'll show you how to do it. That's basically what that webinar, and all my stuff is all about crafting a story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you nailed it on the head right there. Right at the very end, you said all of your stuff is about crafting a story. Part of what people misunderstand, and stories sell. I mean, they really do. One of the things that we teach is how to sell your product before you ever get to the offer. And it's all about telling stories about what your product can do. It's not necessarily like how your product operates, which is what most experts think. Most info marketers think. They're like, oh, I've got this 6-week course that I'm selling at the end of this webinar. I need to condense all of that, put it into 45 minutes of content, and then hopefully they'll buy at the end. And they're giving demos. They're doing, oh, let me show you the back office. Like, no.
Nobody cares about that.
Nobody cares.
You're 100% right. They care about the result they're going to get, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, you put that story and then you say, hey, here's the result. And then that gets people excited because they're like, oh, okay, that's the result I'm looking for. And in fact, I learned this from Perry Belcher. The more you actually give them content, the more, and Kevin, I learned this from Kevin Nations too, the more objections they're going to have. So the more content you give them, the more things they can say, because the answer at the end of the webinar is always, will it work for me? I know Joel's badass, right? He's really cool. And I know this guy's awesome, but will it work for me? So that's the question going on in their mind. You can't give ammunition to that question. So when you simplify it, make it a story, and then give them the result, it sort of eliminates that question.
100%. And it's easier said than done, of course, right? Because if, somebody's listening to this interview right now and they know Jon's made tens of millions of dollars from webinars because he's got this great skill of being able to simplify it. But the average expert out there, the average webinar marketer out there is not like, multiple 8-figure webinar guy. So while this is simple, it takes practice and it takes skill to be able to not give them objections. We talk about all the time. And when we write webinars, it takes our team a lot of time to dive into what the offer is. Okay, what are they really providing? How can we tell these stories that isn't giving them content? Like a confused mind doesn't buy it. Like I learned that from Russell Brunson, who I'm sure learned it from somebody else, but I learned that quote. It's like a confused mind doesn't buy. And in the nature of info marketers, we're giving them content. We're in the business of selling them content. So it's really difficult to trim out the content and just sell them inspiration and hope. And but you're 150% right, man. The more content you give them, the more objections they are going to have for why it won't work for them.
Yeah. The only way that works is like if you're selling a software that takes out all the complexity, then, pour it on, right? Make it just content, let their head explode. And then, oh, hey, by the way, I got this. But yeah, for what we do on the info side, no. And, one thing I want to add too, and we may get to this, but love of God, here's the simplest thing that will help people when they go to craft a webinar. Talk to your customers. Mm-hmm. Just have conversations with them. And they don't even have to be deep conversations. It's like, if I say to you, hey, Joel, if I'm going to sell something to you and I'm like, hey, what are you struggling with right now? And then Joel, tells me everything and then I write it down. Well, after 10 conversations, guess what? 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them will be the exact same thing. And then a light bulb will go off for you and you'll be like, that's my message. So if you have an audience, it is very, very important to pick up that telephone and talk to your customers. And when we talk about virtual cash machine, I took the sales calls. After the first webinar, I took all the sales calls. And it bam, it was a braingasm of what in the webinar everybody said, which we can talk about, but they told me basically what they needed out of it. And I changed the whole webinar format on that based on those phone calls.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So let's jump into that. Okay, so we're going to move from your first webinar, which was Facebook Traffic Jam. You did well over $5 million from a from a webinar that took you 15 minutes to write before it was going live. Super awesome, and you gave your whole formula for how you tell stories and you inspire people and solve their problems. That's essentially it. So you crushed it on that webinar, right? You generated millions of dollars. Like, what was going through your mind now? Like, after you did your first webinar and you realized the results that it was producing, I mean, you had to be pretty excited, right? Or were you expecting?
Yeah. I mean, the first time that I sold something like that, the first dude that said yes on the calls, because I took them myself, I went, oh, okay, cool. Now, I was already making money doing what I was going to teach, but it was super exciting. And selling that many was, it was super exciting. And affiliate partners were happy and excited because it was converting so well. People were reaching out to me. And so, it was way fun. And I just wanted to do it as many times as I possibly could. And I really enjoyed doing the webinars. It's something I really enjoyed.
Awesome. So now let's fast forward to 2014. You've got a new offer coming out called Virtual Cash Machine. This one's a little bit different. Okay, you're not going to a strategy call. You're going direct to sale, and it's a $7,000 offer. For those of you listening right now, if you're listening right now, most people are going to tell you, I've even been a proponent of this, that there's a price of elasticity of what you can sell directly on a webinar, usually between $1,000 to $2,000. So I'm going to put my student cap on, and I'm going to learn and listen. How the hell did you sell a $7,000 offer direct to sale on the webinar from cold traffic? What's the process that we went through here?
Yeah. So the first thing I did when I launched it to my audience, I did go to a strategy session. Mm-hmm. When I launched it to my first affiliate, I went to a strategy session and I took every phone call. And so I knew everything going on in their head with regards. The number one thing that I see people do, Joel, is, and it's so simple in my opinion, is they get caught up in what they want to sell and not what their customer wants, right? Because they're not talking to their customer. And so sometimes we live on an island. And the last time I checked, it's going to be a human being that pulls out their credit card and buys your stuff, right? So you want to know what their thoughts are, what are their objections, etc. So after I did that, I crafted the message to be exactly what they wanted and exactly what they didn't want. Because the thing is, in the webinar, creating a good offer is all about what people hate, right? So you find out what they don't like, and then you position your stuff different. So when I did that, then I went out and I was able to explain. In that particular instance, it was an ad arbitrage offer. Well, what do people not like? Well, you got to sell stuff, right? And so this was crafted as how to make money online without selling anything. And so immediately they're like, oh, I don't sell anything. And then I positioned it like, it's so hard to find a good offer. You don't know if it's going to convert, but this, you don't have to sell anything. This is just math. How many clicks can I send and how much can I make? And so then by the time you mentioned this, when we were just in conversation, the idea is by the time you get to ask for the sell, they're already dying to buy. Like, hey, dude, just put the link up so I can buy it, right? And so everybody, I'm painting this picture, and it was an accurate picture of the fact that they can make, the guys doing the webinar, they were making hundreds of thousands of dollars on this click arbitrage. And so $7,000 doesn't seem like much, when you're talking about those kind of results. And so we just sent them right to the cart, and I give them two options. People always need options, so I give them two. And it was, full pay or payment plan. And that was basically the thing. And it just converted like gangbusters right off that page.
That's crazy. So how long was this webinar? I want to kind of work back.
About 90 minutes. I always try to make the webinar 90 minutes and then do a question and answer. And one thing I'll tell people, and you may tell people this, but the longer your question and answer is, the more sales you're going to get. Because everybody's got that, will it work for me? Like literally, I live in Texas. Will it work for people in Texas? And it's like, yeah. And it took me a long time to get that. I used to get frustrated. I'm like, dude, I just answered that for the lady in Maine to tell her it'd work in Maine. But they do that. I mean, I do it. Well, okay, cool. Will it work for me? Will it work for me? And so people always have that. So the longer you can get people asking those questions, then the more people fall off the fence, especially if you are closing to an order form instead of a strategy session. Because on a strategy session, you're going to be able to answer a lot of those. But in an order form setting, you have to answer those on the webinar. Mm-hmm. So I would do, sometimes my presentation would last 90 minutes and then the Q&A would be an hour and a half or 2 hours. And I'm telling you, I'd stay on until the last person had a question, because those were my sales that would fall off. And then when they hear the replay, it's all the questions people want to ask, right? So then that's what really helps your sales on a webinar if you're selling directly to the offer.
So as we talk about how you structure your webinar and the content and how, there's not a whole lot of teaching here, right? It's kind of just What do they hate? And I love that. And people always want to say, oh, what do they want? And it was Kevin and Travis who I learned this from. It's like the desire is there, but you have to paint that as like, oh, that's just inevitable. The way that I think about it is you have to assume that you know where their desire is going. And yeah, you can talk about it, but a lot of people really focus on that and they're trying to say, here's how you get to this desire. But I was going through some of Travis's stuff and he said, what you really have to do is, you picture Hell Island and Heaven Island, and in between there in the water are the sharks. And it's like, you're not really speaking to Heaven Island. You just assume that that's where they want to go. What you have to be is you have to be the shark killer. And people have jumped in the water before and they've been bitten and they're afraid to get bitten again. That's what they're really afraid of. That's what they hate. They hate selling. How are you going to kill that? How are you going to kill that shark? Why do they hate selling? Because they hate hearing no, right? Or they're scared to get bit again and get that no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Travis is probably, he and Kevin are probably two of the best offer creators I've ever been around. They're just amazing. But he's 100% right. And how you do that is you just position your offer as different. And just to tell you what I did on Virtual Cash Machine, so everybody was aware of click arbitrage, right? And so what I did, everybody knew what was going on, but a lot of people couldn't make it work. So, and this is where knowing your audience is very, very important. Understanding what they want and what they're afraid of. What are the sharks, right? Is it a shark? Is it a piranha? If you tell your audience, hey, you don't have to worry about sharks, but they're worried about piranhas, then it's like, doesn't do you any good. So I said, here was the thing. My offer was about slideshows. And so I said, I gave them a typical click arbitrage breakdown where you get 1.8 page views. And out of that, you're going to make X. And that's why people can't make traffic work. But with us, we put these slideshows on. So our page views are like 19.6. We get 18 more views than this guy. And so you can see how that math works. And I said, LeBron James is the best basketball player in the world, but you give me 18 shots and you give him 2, I'm going to beat him. Right. And people were like, oh yeah, and so that's how I craft the story. But what did I really tell them? I didn't get into, here's the copy for the slideshow. And here, no, man, no, you got to paint the picture. You bog them down with details and it's just a sell killer.
That's why the way that we approach it is we always just talk about the model. Like the way for us to simplify it so we don't get into the details is like, so we talk about, for anyone who's watching this on video, you can kind of see I call it the perfect expert model, right? When we sell our programs, we talk about the model. We don't talk about, oh, you need to build a webinar for this, and then you got to do this, and this is what you talk about. It's like, no, when you understand the model, you buy into the model, and when you buy the training, then we're going to show you how to implement that model. And so when you think, the way that I've been able to train my copywriters is to prevent them from getting into the details, because even great copywriters will be tempted to be like, okay, well, how do you do this? Like, back up, think about the model, and how can you tell stories that support your overall model? I love it, man. Love it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
So I want to talk about how you get people, not necessarily traffic side, but we're talking about here, one thing that's really, really critical when you're trying to sell, you want to talk about the things that they hate, right? When we're in the webinar, we throw stones and we show them how to kill the sharks and how to solve that pain. How do you approach promoting the webinar? Again, not traffic, but like, how do you get them interested in the webinar? Is that now more about the desire focus, the end result, or do you attract them with pain-based headlines? What have you found?
Well, I've done both. A lot of times it depends on who the market is. And so like Travis will tell you, entrepreneurs are a market we will run to heaven, right? We run towards a result. So with entrepreneurs, you can sell the result. But non-entrepreneurs typically are fleeing hell. So then you hit a pain point for those guys to where, it's like, hey, how are you going to survive the Bitcoin crash? Pain point. Oh, wow. Where an entrepreneur, if that's my target market with Bitcoin, it's like, how I tripled my money in Bitcoin or whatever. So there's a difference there depending on who your market is, but I've used both and they both work.
That's cool. You're right. I mean, the entrepreneurs are all about the opportunity, right? We're
Yeah.
opportunists. We're opportunity seekers. So we're going to run to whatever we see as the light at the end of the tunnel. I've never
Yeah.
heard that before. Like, it's never been so clearly defined. It's like those non-entrepreneurs are going to be avoid the crash, avoid, how to avoid the next '08 crash or '07, real estate crisis. Awesome, man. Yeah. I mean, so we've always had that internal battle when we craft new webinars. Like, do we lead with a desired result, or do we lead with avoiding a pain?
Yeah. I think also if there's a real prevalent pain point, then it helps to really hit that pain if it's a real prevalent pain point. If they don't know what their pain is, then obviously you have to hit the result too. But yeah, I'm a big believer in both of them, and I try to intertwine them. I will tell you, it seems like ads with pain do better for us than ads with pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to echo that statement only because we've run a lot of ads, webinar ads specifically. You might get a lower cost per registration with a pleasure based or desire based ad, but there's less buy-in when it's not associated with a pain. If you're helping somebody solve a pain and you're talking to them like, oh, okay, I've got a bleeding neck, or I've got a toothache right now, let me help, let's get rid of that. It's probably a more difficult person to market to, but once you get them and you connect with them, they're a higher likelihood because there's already more buying. You've already got that commitment because you've resonated with them saying, I know you've got this pain. So they're probably more likely to show up, attend, and buy. So
Yeah, great point. Totally agree with that.
So I've had this conversation with a couple of people recently on Sold with webinars, and I'm going to start to, at least for the next couple of interviews, I want to make this a common question because I want to see what the trend is. I had an interview with Tim Page, who ran Lead Pages webinars for a handful of years, and he did very, very well. His approach to selling on webinars was very different than everybody else that I've interviewed. So what he will do is he will actually present the offer within the first 5 minutes of the webinar, meaning like, here's the price, the call to action link, and a quick rundown of the details. Then he goes through, does his whole webinar at the end. He's like, all right, I already gave you that offer, right? But here's a quick rundown again. And he crushed it with it. How do you frame, present, and set up the offer on either one of your webinars? Let's say Virtual Cash Machine, your $7,000 direct sale. What have you found to be effective?
So I always do the offer stack for sure, and bullets. I'm a big bullet guy. And so now keep in mind, when I did Facebook Traffic Jam, I naturally kind of do some things. But then when I met Travis, then I realized what I was doing by accident, and now it's pretty dangerous. So I take bullets of, what they want the outcome is. So how to without the, right? And I just hit all of those bullets that I can before the offer, because I'm bound to hit a pain point here. If I have 30 bullets and I'm going to go through them, I'm bound to hit a pain point. And so that's how I sell it. So I stack that up, then I give them the offer, try to make it irresistible, and then I even stack more bonuses on there. But really, here's the thing. If you understand what your people want to buy, then like how you pitch it is not as important as what it is or what it's going to solve. So if you have that covered, you can pitch it any way you want. I found it doesn't really matter much. So, and really what you want is, like you said, if before you even hit the pitch, guys like, where's the link? That is a good sign. If they start asking for the link before you pitch it, you're in. You're in. Or just give me the damn link.
Yeah. I mean, then you've got rabid buyers. Like, I'm sold. Like, come on, man. I got to go. Like, take my money. Right.
Yeah.
So I guess the main question that I want to ask as it comes to revealing the offer is, when you do your webinars, do you let them know anytime before you actually get to the call to action link that there's going to be an offer? Like, do you pre-frame anytime during the content of the intro?
Yeah. So when I'm introing, I've got this line that's in my webinars now. I don't know if anybody knows Jerry Weintraub, the late Jerry Weintraub, but his brother said, and I love this, so I stole it. His brother said, Jerry's going to sell you something and you're going to buy it and you're going to be happy about it. And so when I open my webinar, I'm like, here's what we're going to cover. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to work with us at the end. And you're going to want to do that. And you're going to be happy about it. So stay on to the end and you'll get that opportunity. And I just pre-frame it just like that. Like, I'm going to sell you something and you're going to love it. So yeah, I make no bones about the fact that I'm there to sell you something and you're going to like it, because here's what I believe. And I think that if people pre-frame their webinars like this, they'll have a lot of success. I sell stuff that helps people, right? People have a problem and I sell stuff to help them. Why in the hell wouldn't I want to sell them something? Right? I want to sell them something because it's going to help them. And so I always look like I'm doing them a favor. Like, for real, I'm doing you, if you're on my webinar, I'm doing you a favor because I'm going to sell you something that's going to make your life better. Mm-hmm. So I totally do that.
Perfect. And we've been seeing that trend almost every time. The webinars that really crush it. Like, listen, I'm not doing any, black magic or, sleight of hand, let's call it that, where I'm going to kind of give you some teaser content. Oh, by the way, at the end, look, here's an offer, which I think a lot of people have been sold that bill of goods on how to give webinars. Like, that does way more harm than good. And people don't really understand that. It does harm, especially with cold traffic, which is really what we focus on. Is if this is their first experience with you, let them know that you're in the business of helping people. You're in business in general, right? Don't give some sort of sleight of hand and say, I'm going to promise you all this great free content. It's like, no, I've got an offer for you. You're going to love it. Like, you're going to buy it and you're going to love it, because that's what we do. We help people. Yeah, I'm going to teach you a little bit about our model and give you some great content first, but you just don't want to burn that bridge when it's their first exposure with you.
It just seems so silly to me that we think for some reason, so like, I'm going to talk to you like a person, right? Or if you go back to my dad's thing, I'm going to talk to you, or I'm going to talk to somebody like I do my mom or my grandma. Well, I wouldn't lie to my mom or my grandma, right? I mean, I wouldn't say, hey, mom, come here, I'm going to give you all this content. No, like, I'm going to say, hey, I got something I really think you'll like. I think it's going to be awesome for you. And I'm going to talk to him like it's a person. And if I'm not live, I'm not going to be like, hey, we're live. No, we're not live, right? I'm not live. I literally tell people on the on-demand webinar, I'm live now. I'm probably not live when you listen to it. Right? So, because people, they're not stupid. People are not stupid. And if you lose that credibility, it has to come, this is going to sound a little hokey, but it has to come from your heart, though. I mean, you have to really want to help people genuinely, and you have to want to be open and honest with them. And if you do that, then it comes across that way. And they don't care whether it's live or not. They just care that you're honest. But the minute you're not, you're done. The minute you're not, you're done. Just like in a marriage, right? You build trust, and it only takes one lie to bring down years of marriage. And so why do it? Just be honest with them. And I was just going to add that I do the thing at the front. And then I also, a few slides in, Joel, as I'm after my intro, I say again that I've got this great offer for you. And if you're crazy enough to not want to buy it, I literally use that term. If you're crazy enough to where you just don't want to buy it, that's cool. We're still going to have a lot of fun. Stay with me. And so I do that twice on the pre-frame.
Mm-hmm. And the way that you have fun and you let your audience have fun is you tell stories. People love freaking stories. The story that you told me about, you put me up against LeBron James, who is the greatest basketball player, or Michael Jordan, or both of them on the same team, right?
Yeah.
And you give me 18 shots and they only get 1 or 2, I'm going to beat them 10 times out of 10.
Yeah. In that story, you're illustrating that these other guys just don't understand what I understand, but I'm a regular person, because I am a regular person and I'm not that smart. And so it's like, hey, but I can do, and I always, 5th grade math is my thing. And I'm like, but you don't have to be, algorithms and things like that to understand 20 shots better than 2, right? So buy my stuff. Yeah. So
stories sell, man. And if you can have fun with your audience and you can get them to picture, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can beat Michael Jordan. I can beat LeBron James. Like, you give me multiple, more shots. Yeah, I'll sink it.
When really what you're doing there too in those stories is you're telling them what this is like an unfair advantage, which also is like, will it work for me? right? So, and I mean, these are all things that I created after the story. It's not like I thought about all these and plotted them out on a storyboard or anything. So don't get all weirded out by that if you're watching this, but you're doing all that stuff in a story. It's like, oh, I've got this unfair advantage, but because it's in a story, it's not very complex and people can relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where if you start talking about algorithms or slideshows or copy or any of that kind of nonsense, you're going to lose them.
100%, man. I want to wrap up our call on I meant to ask this when you were going through and you're talking about your offer. So we'll end our interview on this because this has been a lot of fun for me. Hopefully everyone who's listening has gotten a lot of golden nuggets. You mentioned something with where most of your sales come from. It's the Q&A. Now, my specific question comes from when we do Q&As, I always, and this could be part of the, maybe our content is positioned incorrectly, but I get a lot of questions with people who are like, oh, well, how do I do this? Can you show us how we do that? And that's like, you want to cut that shit out because like, you're not here to teach them how. That's what the program's for, right? How do you handle that? Like, how do you position it? Do you ignore those questions? Do you politely put them in their place? Or do you say that's what the program's for?
Yeah, well, I'll say both, right? So, hey, it depends on what the question is. So if the question is something short and I can give them a how without the what, right? I'll do that. So, well, how do you build or, so how do you get those 20 shots? Well, we just use slideshows. That's what we do. Or they'll say, well, how do I make a slideshow? And I'll say, here's the thing, for time's sake, I got a whole module. It's like 2 hours long about all the things that you need that go into a slideshow. It's not real complicated, but it's just more time than I can answer now. And you'll see all that inside. So I do it just like that because I always try to be polite to people. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know that sounds silly, but I really mean it. It's like I want to help them, but at the same time, they're just going to get overwhelmed anyway. So understanding that they don't even know, it's kind of like when I was in the car business and a guy walk on a lot and say, what's the price? Well, he doesn't even know what to ask, right? So you just say, well, let's go inside and check it out, right? And then you start talking to him and things like that. And so that's what I do on a webinar. I'm just like, they don't even know really what to ask. And so they start asking these things. And so I always try to move them back to the bullet points a little bit.
Awesome, man. It's a huge point because people who aren't pros in sales, like they're going to, one of the things I've learned that I've been in the short time that I've been with hanging out with Kevin Nations is learning the leadership role, especially from sales. It's like you have to train your customers at every step that your prospects and your customers. You have to train them every step in the process. And if somebody asks a question on a webinar, oh, how do you do this? For the average Joe who isn't fully aware of the ramifications for the expert to just give them the answer, that could cost you $7,000 in a sale. Because if you give them the answer, there's no reason for them to now go buy your training. So that is a very, it's a learned skill, I should say.
Yeah, and I'll do you one step, because people are always like, oh, I have to tell people. Well, first of all, if you're doing them a disservice, right? If you have a whole module or a whole training on something and you try to tell them that right there in that question, you're not going to do them any good, right? Because you're going to miss a bunch of stuff. And so don't think like you have to answer that question. And literally, again, it goes back to talking to them like you would your sister. And I'd be like, well, Joel, dude, I mean, my whole module is like 2 hours long on this. There's no way I could do you a service and actually answer that question here. I would just be doing you a disservice because I'm going to leave a bunch of stuff out. So you'll see that on the inside. Does that answer your question or did you have something else? And then Joel's going to be like, but you're not a dick to Joel where you're like, and pardon my language, everybody, but it's like, no, Joel, I'm not answering that. You'll see that when you pay me $7,000, right? Yeah. But you're just answering it to him like you would, and you're actually doing him a favor.
100%. Jon, dude, this was awesome. When we connected last week, and I'm like, I knew that this interview was going to be just solid, and we didn't even get into any sort of audience building strategies, which I know is another one of your superpowers. But for everyone who's listening right now, know a couple of things. Number one, price point. Really, there is no such thing as price elasticity if you can hit the pain points and you can kill those sharks and you can adequately convey that message to your audience. If you can kill those sharks and show them that you are the solution, they're going to buy your stuff, whether it's on a strategy call, whether it's on a direct sale. And realize that people buy from humans, right? 15 minutes, you built your webinar, 15 minutes before your actual presentation that made you over $6 million, $5.5 million, whatever the final number was, lots and lots of money, right?
Yeah.
You didn't follow a formula. You didn't buy somebody's training program and say, oh, I got to do this. No, you spoke to them. You knew that people were struggling with expensive Facebook traffic, and you knew you had the solution. So you just told them stories. You said, this is the model. This is what we do. It's not necessarily how to do it, but a little bit of the how, but not necessarily the what, what to do for how to solve it. And that's awesome, man. I had a great conversation. Is there any parting thoughts you'd like to leave?
Yeah, man. Thank you. I had a great time and I was excited about it too, especially after we hung out, which is why I wanted to do it now. Listen, when I first got into sales and there was a guy, he was making $80,000 a month in the mortgage space. And my dad intros me to this guy and he's like, hey, listen to him on the phone, right? I listened to him and I was blown away because he was just talking to people. That's what he was doing. There wasn't any big drawn out script. It was just he was being a human being talking to other human beings. So always remember that. Just be a person, talk to people on a webinar like you would if you're there. And I think that that's what's made the difference for me on my stuff.
Awesome, dude. So where can people check out your stuff? I mean, let's send people to you, anyone who's listening.
Awesome. I'm on Facebook. I really don't sell anything in the teaching space, at least currently. But if you want to follow me, you want to see what I'm up to, you can go to Facebook. Jon Tarr, it's me and my wife and my son on there in our picture. And I've got nothing to sell you, which makes me a bad marketer right now. But yeah, you can follow me there. And if I ever do have something to sell you, then you can buy it.
Well, you've got a massive cryptocurrency following right now, right?
Yeah. I'm heavy in the crypto space. And in fact, I've been in it since 2013. And because of that, I really got out of teaching because I'm so focused on my publishing business. Yeah.
Awesome. So what's the name of your group? Where can they check that?
Totally Crypto is my group. So yeah, if you're unfamiliar with cryptocurrency, I always tell people, if you're scared of it or you're unfamiliar, whether you love it or hate it, you need to be educated. And that group is all about the educational side of cryptocurrency. I think we have 40,000 members currently. So
amazing, man. Amazing. All right. So that's all we got for today. So go check out Jon. Jon is Jon's an excellent guy. He's a very, very smart dude. I know that he doesn't give himself enough credit, but I can tell you just from the conversation that we've had today, all the results that he's gotten, I mean, simplifying everything is going to get you better results. So that's what we've got for today's episode. Jon, thank you again. And for everyone who's listening right now, we'll talk soon.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to giving you the next one. You can also follow and watch the behind-the-scenes look at how I'm personally launching a brand new 6- and 7-figure product from scratch at soldwithwebinars.com/TV. And if you'd like to come hang out with other fellow experts, join our Facebook group at soldwithwebinars.com/experts. Join us next time, and I'll see you there.